The wind hammered the town like a fist, ripping shingles and courage in one swipe. Daniel counted the seconds between thunder and breath, but the door stayed shut. Shadow's paws scraped the floorboards, whine, pause, whine, always facing the same door. Somewhere out there, a little girl's voice rode the rain like a thread, thin, fraying, urgent. The K9 wouldn't move. The soldier wouldn't blink. The storm wouldn't wait. The sirens had been wailing since dusk, and by now the storm wore the town like a soaking cloak, heavy, dragging, muting every voice that tried to rise above it. Daniel could feel the barometric pressure in his ribs the way he used to feel incoming mortars, a tightening first, then a hollow thump that made sound behave like it had a weight of its own. Miller's Creek was mostly dark. Power lines drooped, windows shone with candlelight if they shone at all, and the creek had graduated to a river with ambitions. Shadow, a black Antan German shepherd with a tactical harness still scarred from deployments Daniel never talked about, had made up his mind 40 minutes ago. He'd pulled Daniel down the block, past a pickup stranded like a beached whale, past a for sale sign that danced like a metronome, to this one warped blue door that looked as stubborn as a judge. "We should be checking the low ground," Daniel said, rain running under his collar. "Flood pulls them downhill." Shadow didn't care. He planted himself, chest out, tail rigid, ears triangulated. His nose touched the scene where door met frame, and then the dog did the thing that shifted Daniel from tactics to faith. He refused to leave. One paw up, tapping the wood with the same rhythm he used on collapsed walls overseas when the faintest breath answered back. Tap. Pause. Tap. "Okay," Daniel said, voice soft. He swept his light over the cheap brass numbers tacked crookedly above the door, 118B. The porch was a shallow step barely visible under the rain sheet. Ivy strangled the handrail, a rusting tricycle leaned on its side like it had been mid-laugh and forgot the punchline. He hit the door with knuckles first, then palm. "Hello? Emergency response. Anyone inside?" The storm swallowed his words and belched them back. No answer. But Shadow's whine lifted slightly, a tone Daniel had learned to translate. Not pain. Not fear. An alert, there's something there. He tried the knob. Locked. In the movies, you shoulder a door and it caves. In reality, wetwood swells, deadbolts bite into their sockets, and you mostly hurt yourself. Daniel looked around, no sign of fresh footprints, not with this much runoff. But the porch had debris patterns he recognized, a thin arc of leaves gathered against the threshold, broken, then gathered again. The door had opened recently. And maybe fast. "Emily," he called, and the name traveled past his teeth before he realized he'd said it. Because every storm has a single name when there's a missing child, and tonight the scanners had said female, 9, brown hair, blue jacket, last seen heading toward Maple. Maple was 3 blocks west, and the creek's wrong side. But to Daniel, streets were arteries, and water picked the easiest path. He'd laid maps in his head the minute the first calls came. 118B sat like a knuckle at the bend of a fist. He stepped back and angled his beam to catch any interior light leak. Nothing. He glanced at the window, painted shut, security film bubbling under the wet. He could pry it, but the seconds would spill away. "Shadow," he said. The dog's head flicked to him. "Check." Shadow drifted along the siding to a crawlspace vent and inhaled, chest expanding, then returned to the seam, urgency rising. He tapped again, tap, tap, pause, and Daniel felt the old prickle at his neck. The dog's cadence had pulled 2 people from concrete years ago. It wasn't a trick. It was a language. Daniel fished a small pry bar from his pack. The brass plate around the knob was already loose. He levered it, felt the give. The frame groaned. From inside, something knocked back, soft, irregular. "Wind? Or?" "Hold," he said on reflex, as if he were back in the dark hallways where walls had ears. He leaned close. Behind wet wood, the world narrowed to the scent of mildew and dish soap and something else, wet plastic, cheap tarp, and the metallic breath of canned food. A pantry? A shape moved low on the other side, and Shadow's tail thudded once against Daniel's leg like a telegraph. Contact. "Who's there?" Daniel called. "It's okay. I'm here to help." Static answered, the wet kind, rain hiss amplified by enclosure. Then a whisper, not words but the friction of a small throat trying not to cry. He pictured a child hiding because storms teach you that doors are both shields and traps. He pictured the handle beyond reach, water rising in the kitchen, and a little hand flat against wood, counting taps. "Back up," Daniel told Shadow, and the dog yielded a half step. He set the pry bar, gave it torque, a jerk, a grimace, wood splintering like ribs. The door didn't open. It unhooked itself reluctantly, bottom first, as if glued by silt. Cold air pushed out, smelling of river and fear. Daniel swung the beam in a slow carve. The entry was a drowned throat. Rugs had become seaweed, a lamp lay face down in a brown slick, and tiny white seeds of drywall snowed from the ceiling with each gust. "Hello," he tried again. Shadow surged forward but stopped at the threshold and looked sharply left. Daniel followed the beam. A utility closet door stood ajar, and the metal of a cheap latch jittered with each gust. He reached, eased it open. Not a child. A stack of pet carriers, empty except for shredded newspaper. The top carrier door hung bent. He squinted, deep claw marks raked the plastic like someone had tried to force it open with paws. He scanned lower. Fresh dog hair caught on a screw head. Hackles rose on Shadow's spine. A storm-swollen house. A dog locked in. A door broken from the inside. Whoever had been here, human or animal, did not go willingly. Daniel's radio crackled weakly, too much interference. He thumbed it off. The beam swept further, photographs stuck to the wall and wet trapezoids, faces smeared, one of them a girl with a missing front tooth holding a tan mutt with one ear crooked. Emily? If it was, the dog in the picture was not Shadow but something with shelter eyes and a grin that says we picked each other. The dog had a red collar with a blue tag. "Shadow," Daniel murmured, "find." The command was soft, no theatrics. Shadow moved like a needle drawn to a pulse, past a collapsed coat tree, nose down, then up, sampling the air column. He angled toward the back hallway, then froze. He turned his head to the front door again, ears locking. He wouldn't step over the threshold. Wouldn't abandon the door. It hit Daniel then, not just someone was inside, but someone will come back. The dog wasn't guarding the house, he was guarding the perimeter of a promise. Whoever had left had used this door and, if they survived, would return to this door. Dogs learn doors like people learn names. Thunder stepped close, and rain slapped harder. The creek would be higher by the hour. If Emily had gone looking for the dog in the photo, or if the dog had dragged her toward safety and lost her, if the two were separated, she might try to come home the only way she understood. Through this door. And if the waterline climbed while he hunted elsewhere, she could land here to a locked seam and no light. "Okay," Daniel said, a decision settling. He dug in his pack, pulled a roll of bright surveyor's tape, and tied a thick ribbon to the handle, letting it stream in the wind, a flag for a frightened child navigating by fragments. He left the door ajar, wedged safely so it couldn't swing shut. He set a chem light on the step, its green quint of glow pushing back the dark. He placed 3 pebbles in a triangle on the threshold, the signal he used with Shadow, "We return." Shadow exhaled, posture easing a hair, but he kept facing outward, watching the rain like a sentry. Feet in the flood, head in the wind, he refused to turn. Daniel rested a hand on his neck, feeling muscle and heartbeat steady as a drumline. "Doors marked," Daniel said, mostly to himself. "Now we find the string." He meant the path, the one that grief and instinct and storm water would trace. He swept the beam and found it, little half-moons of mud on the porch, a smear at knee-height on the jamb, and, a miracle, one blue thread stuck in the latch plate, the kind you get from a cheap puffer jacket. He eased it free and held it to the light. It was Emily's size of blue. Shadow looked back at him once, then forward again, a statue made of patience. "Stay or go?" Daniel asked, even though he knew the answer. Shadow's paw lifted and pressed the wood. Tap. "We hold the door. And then we hunt." They began with the map Daniel carried in his head, then scrawled it onto the world with light and boot prints. He moved east along Maple, the street that held its breath when the creek overflowed, scanning gutters and hedges, cars abandoned at strange angles like chess pieces mid-match. Shadow stayed half a step ahead, but each time they reached a cross street, he turned to look back toward 118B, as if tugged by an invisible leash. Trust the dog, Sandra, his friend at the county office who had slipped him the latest floodplain maps, always said. He trusts the wind better than you. Wind tonight came in heaves, hernia strong, carrying shreds of roofing and the sweet rot of saturated wood. It also carried voices, fragments from other responders 2 blocks over, someone yelling about a propane leak, a woman calling names that weren't Emily. Every sound was both urgent and irrelevant until it wasn't. Shadow slowed at a chain-link fence choked with vines. He nosed between links, inhaled, then shifted left, tracing the boundary where water made a new shore. Daniel's beam caught something snagged at ankle level, red plastic, the torn edge of a dog collar tag. He crouched, thumbed away grime, half a bone-shaped tag with the letters RK, left on it, as if the rest of the name had been eaten by the storm. Barker, he guessed aloud, thinking of the photo of the tan mutt with the crooked ear. Or Spark. Whatever the name, the leash that matched this tag had done its job until it didn't. He pocketed the fragment, logged the coordinates on instinct, fence corner, 2nd and Maple, 5 houses down from 118B. He kept the beam moving. That's what they drill into you, eyes track, light sweeps, mind catalogs. You don't get to choose when your training saves someone, so you practice like it will always be tonight. A set of small sneaker prints appeared where mud had pooled in a garden bed, the right foot deeper than the left, like a child favoring one leg. The stride length was short, tired, or frightened, or pushing against current. "Emily," he said softly, letting the name ride the light. Shadow's ears cupped backward to catch his voice and then forward again to interrogate the world. A car alarm hiccuped somewhere. A transformer coughed and died. Daniel moved. He thought of doors, how children understand them. Where do you run when you're 9 and the sky is chewing houses? To a porch light, to a neighbor you believe will open, to the corner store whose owner slips you lollipops, to a church whose big doors always yawn wide on Sundays. He checked those in his mind and drew a route that stitched them. Home Mrs. Anders' porch, the little bodega on Birch, the prefab church with the blue cross. He and Shadow made Birch in 7 minutes that felt like squeezing through a throat. The bodega was dark but not dead. Its metal grate hung half open, and inside, somewhere near the back, a radio muttered a soccer game from a world that did not have water in its shoes. He swept the beam along the curb, and Shadow yanked right, toward the alley. Daniel followed, boots slipping on a film of oil and rain. The alley had become a canal, shallow but swift, carrying takeout menus and cigarette butts and someone's bright pink flip-flop like a message in a bottle. Shadow stopped where crates made a little cul-de-sac of dry. The dog leaned into nothingness, nose up, nostrils wide, mouth shut, and when he exhaled, the sound was a thread pulled tighter. "What is it?" Daniel whispered, though he knew he'd get no English. He got something better, action. Shadow stepped onto the lowest crate, stretched, and touched his nose to the bottom of a ripped poster taped to the bodega's side door. The poster had smeared ink that used to be a missing notice, an old one, from months ago, different child, different season. But below it, stuck to the same tape, was something new, a blue jacket fiber, shorter than a thumbnail, matching the thread he'd pocketed at the door. He leashed the evidence with care and taped it inside his field notebook. The storm gave, the storm took, tonight, it was giving him lint. A voice behind him made him spin. You Daniel? The beam caught a face, older man, hoodie up, eyes bright with stress. He lifted both hands, palms out. I'm Mr. Blanco. I own the store. Heard you calling names. Emily, Daniel said. 9 years old. Blue jacket. Maybe with a tan dog, one ear crooked. Blanco's eyes shifted left, memory seeking purchase. I closed early. But I saw a girl around 6 o'clock, before the worst. Hair stuck to her face, blue jacket. She was pulling a dog by a red leash, but the dog kept stopping to sniff everything. She looked, he gestured to his own chest, as if searching for the word. Determined, he said finally. She asked if I had batteries. I was out. I told her to go home. Which way did she go? Blanco pointed toward the prefab church. Said she thought Pastor Jim would have a flashlight. Daniel's skin went cold. The church sat low, its parking lot already a shallow lake. Thank you, he said, already moving. Hey, Blanco called, voice lifted above the rain. I put a lantern in the window. If she comes back, she'll see it. Good, Daniel replied, and meant the small kindness like a sandbag on a riverbank. Enough of them and you by an hour. They cut through yards because streets were lies now. Shadow vaulted a hedge like a rumor and landed in a vegetable garden turned soup. Daniel slogged after him, thighs burning. He used the beam to pick out edges and anchoring shapes, trash can, birdbath, knee-high garden fence you don't want to trip on with gear. On the far side, a swing set creaked like a boat. He hated that sound tonight. The church loomed blue-white in the sheet lightning, its cross reflecting like a wet blade. The front doors were open, good, but the interior was dark, bad. Water lapped at the threshold. Daniel waded in, hold up your breath cold around his shins. Hello, he shouted, voice going cathedral hollow. Shadow's nails clicked on tile. He paused, head snapping left, then right. Daniel cut the beam across pews turned into dark teeth. Something moved, fast, small, under the third pew, and Shadow went still, the kind of still that is a loaded spring. Easy, Daniel said. He dropped to a knee, lowered the beam, and lit a tangle of cleaning rags, and 2 eyes the color of bottle glass. The tan mutt from the photo stared back, trembling, a red leash trailing like a vein. Hey, buddy, Daniel breathed, letting the light fall aside so the dog didn't take it as a threat. Where's your girl? The dog hesitated, then crawled forward, belly low, as if crossing a battlefield in miniature. His left ear stood, his right folded in the middle like a paper airplane that forgot how to fly. He reached Daniel's knee, sniffed Shadow, then Daniel's palm, then whipped his head toward the side door and whined, a thin, searing sound. He wants us to follow, Daniel said. The mutt didn't wait. He sloshed toward the door, paws stirring silt. Shadow followed, and Daniel moved with them, sweeping the beam in an arc that kept the edges of the world visible. Outside, the rain felt somehow heavier, a second skin. They crossed the lot, water now mid-calf, and reached the side yard where the ground dropped toward the creek. Here, the mutt balked, planted paws, and looked down, a steep incline littered with branches and drowned grass. Daniel aimed the beam and felt the world lurch. In the mud near the bottom lay a smear of blue, half buried, clinging to a root like a flag surrendering. Emily's jacket. He recovered it, checked pockets, empty, heavy with water. No blood. The zipper had broken teeth, torn by force or panic. He lifted it to his face, cold, storm, detergent, a child's shampoo that tried to be apple and ended up being sugar. Shadow sniffed, nose working like gears, then turned his head slightly upstream, not downhill. Upstream? Daniel asked, confused. The flood runs down, so people do too, unless they're on something that floats, or unless they cling to higher ground and then get carried sideways by a surge. The mutt began to bark, short, urgent, 1-2-1-2, facing a line of cottonwoods that bordered a thicket. Daniel swung the beam and caught a shimmer of metal beyond the trees, half caught in brush, a shopping cart, the kind that migrates from the supermarket to the edges of town, now wedged like a raft with intentions. A flash of white on the cart's side, sticker, maybe. He moved closer through water that sucked at boots and patience. The cart had wedged across a culvert so that debris piled on its upstream side in a sopping, ugly raft, branches, plastic, a pink flip-flops mate, and a child-sized umbrella with cartoon stars, the fabric torn and fluttering. Emily was no longer a line on a map. She was a trail in the present tense. He catalogued everything: jacket torn at the zipper, umbrella star pattern, shopping cart wedged across culvert at a diagonal, debris raft thick enough to hold weight for a moment and treacherous enough to drown a second later. The creek roared where it narrowed, voice raised by stone, and the rain put knives on its surface. He could smell the iron of churned soil and the chemical whisper of runoff. If Emily had crossed here, she hadn't done it by strategy, she'd done it because the world offered a stepping place in a second, and children have a talent for taking both. Shadow stood square at the bank, head tilted, feeding the world through his nose. The tan mutt paced the edge, whining a Morse code Daniel wished he could read. He crouched at the culvert mouth and shone his beam under the cart. The flow shaved inches off the raft with each second, sticks peeled away, bags bulged and went, foam stitched and unraveled. There, caught near the metal mesh, glowed something reflective, a strip of silver tape like the kind parents press onto kid gear because storms and streets respect fluorescent. He reached, fingertips numbed by cold, and fished it free. It was attached to a snapped plastic buckle. He played out the timeline. Girl and dog reach the church. Storm worsens. Girl tries to return home, or tries to reach another safe door, cutting along the cottonwoods that feel like a barrier between here and there. Debris snag becomes bridge for a heartbeat. She steps. A branch shifts. The umbrella tangles. She drops the jacket to move faster. The dog hesitates, gets dragged by the red leash, slips the collar when the buckle fails. They separate. She stumbles to the far bank, if she's lucky, grabs roots, crawls toward lights. Where? He traced the far bank with his beam. The culvert spit water into a narrow channel that ran behind a row of storage units. Half of their roll-up doors sat open, yawning black, contents tied with bungee cords and hope. Beyond that, a gravel path rose toward a water tower lit by a blinking red eye. If she'd made it across, she might have hugged that rise. Children move toward height because height feels like safety. Shadow made the decision for him. He began to move upstream, not to cross yet, but to find the place the bank shelved down into something a man could pretend was a ford. The mutt followed, red leash sucking and slapping over puddles. Daniel moved with them, counting steps to keep panic at heel. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe on odd numbers, scan uneven. They found a shallow 50 yards up where the creek spread and slowed like it remembered manners. Stay, Daniel told Shadow, and the dog obeyed with visible reluctance. He waded in, feeling for holes, planting each boot like a promise. The water took his legs in a cold embrace and pushed. He leaned against it and made the other side, chest loud with effort. Shadow whined, not complaint, but a soldier's "I should be with you." Hold, Daniel called, and pointed to the ground, then the door direction. The message was old as their partnership: keep the route home visible. On the far bank, gravel sucked at his soles. He climbed to the storage row and peered into black mouths. He'd been in flood shelters that started as garages and became confessionals, places where people put the thing they can't afford to lose and hope the weather shares that opinion. He called, "Emily," and the units gave his voice back in thinner versions. He swept one, then two, then. Shadow barked behind him, a single report that cracked through the storm like a flare. Daniel spun. Shadow had not disobeyed. He had moved to the edge, front paws in the water, head cocked, gaze locked not on Daniel but over his shoulder, past him, into the dark behind the storage row. Daniel followed the line of that stare and saw a thin, quivering ribbon of light, a flashlight beam shaking in a circle against corrugated metal. It bobbed like a will-o'-the-wisp, then steadied. The mutt threw his head high and yelped. The beam answered by jittering fast, 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 signal or fear. "Emily," he shouted. "Hold the light up." The beam rose, wavered, held. He moved, fast now, splashing through shallow mud, phone out to tag his own location even though signals were dead, habit, more than hope. He rounded the corner and nearly collided with a chain-link gate padlocked at the center. Beyond, the storage yard narrowed to a runnel flanked by stacked pallets and a dumpster with its lid torn off like a can of tuna. The light jerked near the far end where the ground dipped again toward the creek, and a small figure hunched by the fence, the beam gripped in both hands, head down against the rain. The cartoon stars on the umbrella had torn into flags, the blue jacket was gone, her hair stuck to her forehead like scribbles. "Emily," he said again, quieter now because the distance between fear and safety is measured in tone. "I'm Daniel. I'm here with the dogs." At the word dogs, the mud exploded in relief, straining the red leash, barking that special bark dogs keep for reunions and rescues. Emily's head snapped up. Her eyes, green, not bottle glass after all, found the mutt first, and something unspooled in her shoulders. She didn't run. She didn't move. She was caught by something else, something Daniel hadn't seen yet because his beam was catching on the obvious. He lifted it higher. The fence behind Emily bowed outward over the creek cut, roots undermined, soil gone. The chain link had become a net over nothing, and Emily had braced herself with one sneaker on a rebar nub that held, barely, and one sneaker on mud that slid a fraction every heartbeat. If she shifted wrong, the fence would flip, and she would scissor down the bank into the channel. "Don't move," he said, calm as a metronome. "You're doing perfect. You've done the hardest part." I dropped his collar, she whispered, and the words rode out like confessions. "He's scared of thunder. I tried to go home. The water got mad." "The water gets mad," Daniel agreed. "But we're here now." He scanned for access. The gate was padlocked with a cheap brass laugh. He could cut it with the tool he didn't have. He could climb it and risk jarring the fence at the bad angle. Or Shadow, he said, and the dog had already moved. He trotted downstream to where the fence met a warping post, inserted his shoulders like a key, and leaned into the mesh. It bowed, then tightened, a living brace. Shadow was building a second point of contact with his body, making the fence a triangle instead of a seesaw. "Good," Daniel breathed. He clipped his carabiner to the fence at waist height, threaded his rescue line through, and fixed the other end to a concrete tie-down set in the pad. He tested, it hummed with certainty. He pulled a small folding entrenching tool, the only metal he had with a bite, from his pack and jammed it into the rebar gap at Emily's foot to give her a platform. "Can you hold the light up for me?" he asked. "Like you did, just like that." She nodded, jaw set, a soldier in a 9-year-old body. The mutt barked, head low, tail windmilling. "Buddy," Daniel said, "with me." He looped the red leash around his chest like a sash. If the dog was going to panic leap, it would be into him, not off the edge. He climbed. He moved like a slow idea, deliberate, precise, kinder than his legs wanted to be. The fence shivered under his hands and then steadied because Shadow was an oak tonight. He got close enough to see the tiny pink scrape on Emily's cheek and the way her flashlight beam made constellations on raindrops. He smiled, because it's a bridge. "On 3, he said. "I'll take your weight while you slide your foot onto the shovel. Then we go back the way I came. Okay?" "Okay," she said, and a tear carved a clean line on her face. 1. He set his boot, pressed the fence into Shadow's shoulder. 2. He wrapped his hand around Emily's wrist, small, bird-boned, strong. 3. She moved, beautifully, no flail, just a shift of intention. Her sneaker found the shovel lip, skidded, caught. He felt her wait for a second, a sentence, then half of it transferred to the rope like a period landing in place. The fence did not flip. The creek did not win. They backed up into safety by inches you could count in your teeth. When they reached gravel, he had to talk his legs into being legs again. Emily knelt and wrapped both arms around the tan mutt, and the mutt burrowed his head under her chin and made a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh and was exactly what living feels like when you almost weren't. Shadow shook himself once, water exploding off like confetti, then padded over and touched his nose to Emily's knee. She laid a hand between his ears. "Thank you," she whispered to the dog who wouldn't leave the door. Daniel looked toward the dark where 118B waited, its chem-light coin marking a promise. "We go home," he said. "By the doors that hold." Daniel checked Emily for the things storms like to steal first: heat, breath, and the will to keep going. Her hands were ice marbles, her lips held the blue of cheap ink. He peeled back his pack flap and pulled a crinkling emergency blanket, the gold-silver kind that makes a person look like a fallen comet, and shook it out over her shoulders. The tan mutt wedged himself under the blanket edge without being asked, leaking warmth like a small furnace. "What's his name?" Daniel asked, because names are bridges and bridges matter when water is trying to unmake the town. "Spark," Emily said through chattering teeth. "But I call him Sparky when he's in trouble." The red leash thumped Daniel's chest where he'd bandoliered it. He smiled. "Sparky it is." Shadow circled once, not restless, mapping. He stood facing a single direction again, nose into the rain, head aligned like a compass needle. The angle he kept found the line between here and 118B with uncanny fidelity, as if the ribbon he'd tied to the door had a scent all its own. "We're going home," Daniel said. "But we take the long way because the creek is greedy." He chose a route that bent around trouble he could smell and the kind you only learn by living in a town long enough to know where the ground lies. Power lines had spit sparks when the transformer died. He clocked their position and drew a clumsy halo around them in his head. "Do not step." A propane leak somewhere upwind painted the rain with a sweet, rotten note. "Avoid open flame, go soft with light." A house alarm hiccuped, "Ignore its panic." They skirted the storage row and cut across the lot where shopping carts sat like beached steel jellyfish, their bellies full of sticks. For Emily, each step was a negotiation between trembling and traction. Daniel kept his voice steady, not cheerleader bright, just present. "Good pace. Watch the dip. Put your whole foot down. Anchor your heels. That's it." Shadow checked back every 20 yards to confirm the little squad still held. Sparky, freed from crisis thinking, did what dogs do after fear. He shook it off in one whole-body shiver that sprayed Daniel in a fine, ridiculous mist. Emily giggled, the kind that surprises even the person who makes it. The storm didn't like laughter, it tried to clap it shut. They kept walking. At Birch, they passed Mr. Blanco's bodega. The metal grate was still propped, the lantern in the window threw a brave coin of honey light onto the flood. "Gracias," Daniel called, knowing the word would find its way inside whether Blanco heard it or the storm carried it back to his mouth. A block later, the world pitched a new obstacle. The branch-choked street ended at a river that didn't exist yesterday, runoff that had broken a clogged storm drain and now flowed ankle-deep across the whole width of Maple. The current was sly, patient, the kind that doesn't knock you over all at once but steals your balance finger by finger. Across the way, something moved low against a fence, two somethings, eyes like dime store marbles in the beam. "Raccoons," Daniel said automatically, categorizing so his brain didn't turn every motion into a threat. He scanned higher. The hydro pole at the corner leaned like a tipped lance. Its lines sagged into the water in a black loop. He felt the electrical prickle even before he saw the faint, wicked lace of bubbles where copper-kissed flood. "Back," he said, gentle, hurting Emily with the sweep of his hand and a shift of his body. "We give this one to the storm." Shadow had already angled right, reading the street like Braille. He led them along a hedge line that broke at a narrow side yard. There, someone's forgotten stepping stones made a breadcrumb trail of raised ovals. Sparky bounced ahead, testing each stone with comic seriousness, then looking back like a motivational speaker with pause. Emily followed his rhythm: hop, balance, smile, repeat. Halfway down the lane, a door banged open on their left and a man's voice, raw with something like panic, lashed out, "Hey! You can't cut through there. My yard." Daniel pivoted his beam. The man stood shirtless in a blown-open doorway, hair plastered to his skull, a baseball bat gripped like he planned to argue with lightning next. "Fear dresses up mean when it's cornered." Daniel pitched his tone into the pocket between respect and urgency. "Sir, gas leak on Maple and down lines. We're getting a child home and clearing your fence line. You got anyone inside who needs checking?" The bat dipped, the man blinked like someone had slapped a hand over his eyes and pulled it away. "My mom's sleeping. Oxygen machine." He swallowed. "Power's out." "Then you want us to move and you want to call the firehouse if your battery backup is low," Daniel said, calm, practical, offering him a job to hold on to. He pointed with his chin. "You got a cooler? Put ice around the base unit. Crack the window to vent the generator if you start it. Don't run it in the kitchen, I'm begging you." The man nodded, back on slack. He looked at Emily, at the silver blanket, the golden dog, the soldier and the shepherd, and something like shame slipped through his face. "Sorry," he murmured. Sorry. "It's a night for that," Daniel said. "It's okay." They slipped through his side yard and out onto Willow, which lifted a little sooner than Maple and featured fewer new rivers. Emily's teeth had stopped chattering. Under the blanket, her hands were finding Sparky's ribs and counting them like piano keys. "He came from the shelter," she said. "He picks doors when he's scared. He sits there until I come back." "He's not the only one," Daniel said, thinking of Shadow and the blue door and the triangle of 3 stones that meant we return. He checked his mental geography. 4 blocks south. 2 west. 1 curve. The chem light would be dimming but should still paint its coin on the porch. He imagined it the way you imagine a lighthouse you haven't seen yet, as a promise the world owes you. At the corner of Birch and Alder, the storm pulled a new trick. A pickup, half submerged earlier, had shifted in the current and now blocked their cut-through like a sideways whale. A culvert roared underneath, hidden but audible. The truck creaked in increments. Each time it moved, water sucked downhill in a hungry slurp. "We go around," Daniel started to say, and Shadow interrupted with a stare. "Left, not right." Left was deeper. Left was faster. Left also had mailboxes like little steel islands that could make a handrail if your feet got light. Shadow was not asking, he was laying down doctrine. This is the line that keeps you over the old pipeline trench that hasn't washed yet. Emily watched the shepherd, then Daniel. "Storms train children quickly," she nodded. They made the left. Daniel placed Emily's hand on the first mailbox post, his hand over hers, the muscle memory of guiding a rookie through a live-fire drill. "1 post to the next," he said. "Don't trust the ground between. Trust your hands." They went. The water pressed with stubborn hands, the rain embroidered their shoulders, Sparky moved against Emily's leg like a living wall. Shadow took the lead, each step a silent calculation he let Daniel copy. 2 posts later, ground rose, resistance fell, and the neighborhood's bones emerged: sidewalk, curb, steps. Over the last hedge, the glow appeared at last, sickly, glorious, green on blue. 118B. The surveyor's ribbon still whipped like a tiny flag of surrender that also meant rescue. The pebbles still made the triangle at the threshold. The chem-light coin had bled most of its shine, but it was enough. It was there, and Shadow's whole body did a small, contained tremor of relief that looked nothing like weakness and everything like arrival. Sparky trotted to the door and sat. Just like Emily said. Pick a door. Guard a promise. We're not done, Daniel said quietly, because something in his ribs had been humming since they left the storage yard, and now he understood it wasn't just adrenaline. Somewhere beyond the door, a sound threaded the storm, a thin, papery cough. Not Emily's. Not Sparky's. Older. Drier. It came again, then paused too long. Shadow didn't move. He wouldn't leave the door. Who? Emily whispered. Someone who needed this door as much as you did, Daniel said. Daniel eased the door open with the gentleness you reserve for nests and wounds. The entry smelled like wet drywall and old coffee, the same storm-stale cocktail as before, but underneath lay the tinny, metallic scent he recognized from field tents and living rooms that had turned into hospital corners: oxygen. Stay right here, he told Emily, parking her and Sparky under the porch overhang where rain only nagged, didn't pummel. He handed her the flashlight. 3 flashes if you need me fast. Keep Sparky between you and the street. Emily nodded, eyes big, mouth iron. Sparky sat with his folded ear cocked, the leash a quiet red line. Shadow slipped inside with Daniel, shoulders level, a soldier on a threshold. The cough came again, small, embarrassing, like someone apologizing for taking up space. Daniel followed it down the short hall, past the utility closet with its bent carrier door and the museum of damp photographs. Living room left, kitchen straight. The sound drew him right, bedroom. He swung the beam. An elderly woman lay tilted against a barricade of pillows, a clear cannula looped at her cheeks. The hiss of oxygen was intermittent, wrong, compressor struggling, drawing breath on a dying battery. A portable tank stood near the nightstand, valve closed, the green dome a promise unused. Ms. Anders, he said, because in a town like Miller's Creek, names live in the same drawer as Band-Aids and try not to cry stories. She blinked, fought gravity, then focused on the man, the dog, the wet, the storm. I knew someone would come, she whispered, lips paper. Her hand patted the bed for the call button that wasn't there. Emily's mother went to look for her. Hours. Okay, Daniel said, voiced the temperature of warm palms. He moved to the tank, spun the valve, heard the clean hiss replace the sick one. He checked the regulator, adjusted flow. The room exhaled. There we go. That's better. Ms. Anders tried a crisp nod. It came out like a leaf falling. You're Danny? Karen's boy? Small towns stitch ghosts onto living people. He smiled. Different Daniel, he said. But I'll answer to anything tonight. Shadow had parked himself by the doorway, half in, half out, monitoring this room and world outside at once. He faced the hall, toward the door. Always the door. Anyone else in the house? Daniel asked, scanning for other shapes, ear tuned to the storm for the whine of things that give up. Just me, she said. I sat to rest and the light went. The machine, naughty. She tried to smile at her own scolding joke. It cracked, tender. Is Emily? She's safe, he said, truth like a light switched on. On the porch with her dog. Good girl, Ms. Anders whispered, and the exhale trembled into a cough that sounded more like a thank you than a symptom. Her mother will come to this door, she added, a pronouncement from the altar of neighborhood logic. This is where we leave notes. Cookies. Complaints. Another smile ghosted. Love. Then we keep this door open, Daniel said. He did the math in his head. The tank would last hours at this flow. The waterline on the living room wall told a story of earlier incursions, but for now it sulked a foot below, slapping baseboards in a rhythm that made the house sound like it had a weak heartbeat. The risk wasn't water coming now, it was the unknown interval before Emily's mother came through rain, and whether the town would allow a straight line between places. He moved through the kitchen, wedged chairs and a broom handle to keep the front door cracked without slamming, tied the surveyor's tape to the inside knob as well so the ribbon's dance might speak to anyone peering from the street. Here, here, here. He found a towel and laid it across the threshold so water wouldn't creep in pretending to be nothing. On the porch, Emily squinted at him. Is she okay? We made her machine cooperate, he said. She's breathing easier. You did exactly right coming home. Emily's eyes filled, the kind you don't argue with because they've earned it. Sparky stood, put both paws gently on her thighs, and met her tears with his forehead. Shadow, at Daniel's hip, made the tiniest rumble of approval no one would have heard if they hadn't been paired long enough to listen for such things. Headlights smeared the rain at the end of the block, then dissolved like a rumor. Somewhere, a boat engine throbbed and stopped. Daniel checked the sky, not for stars, which the storm ate, but for the way the cloud belly moved. The tempo had shifted from fury to endurance. Floods sometimes rest between rounds. The worst mistake is to believe it's an apology. He ran a quick porch triage, reset the chem light, crack, shake, brighter coin, added a second tape flag at eye level for adults, wiped a clear space on the wet step with his sleeve so muddy eyes could see prints if they returned. He opened the mailbox and left the beam on low inside, lid propped, to make a tiny lighthouse for a very short person. Little things add up to routes. Then he heard it, the low, unmistakable groan of a big limb surrendering, and the long, too long silence after, when the world holds its breath to see where the weight will fall. He grabbed Emily's shoulder, gentle, and stepped her back under the porch beam. Heads up, he said, and Shadow's ears made two sharp triangles. The limb crashed down half a house away, a wet avalanche. A second later, the neighborhood coughed and the power came alive on one side of the street, 3 houses sparking with light, then darkness again as a breaker somewhere decided no, not safe. Mom will come, Emily said, as if reciting a creed. She said, doors remember us. Daniel nodded. They do. He thought of what else doors do, hold, warn, sing, and sometimes they convene strangers into a family long enough to survive something. He looked at Shadow. The shepherd hadn't taken his eyes off the street. He hadn't because he wouldn't. He wouldn't because somewhere in this messy web of rain and names, the signal still trembled, not finished. Okay, Daniel said to the night, to the door, to the dogs. We make this place visible. And we go fetch the last piece. Emily frowned. The last piece? Your mom, he said. Stay with Ms. Anders. Keep Sparky on a leash. If the water gets bossy, you step onto the couch and yell my name 3 times. Shadow and I will be close. Shadow bumped Daniel's knee with his head. The shepherd's body said one word without moving his mouth, go. The rain changed key, the way a choir does when the song needs more sky. Not louder, wider. It slid off roofs, pulled in fresh places, learned new paths. Daniel took the slope 2 houses down where a sycamore had shredded the fence and laid a ramp of its own ribs. Shadow went ahead, reading the neighborhood script that only noses can parse, where people had stepped recently, where water had pretended to be shallow and wasn't, where air carried the wet wool scent of 1,000 attic hatches opening. They were hunting a specific gravity now, a woman moving fast through a maze that changed every minute. Emily's mother would have triangulated the same way he had, by doors. Mrs. Anders' door. 118B, the church. The bodega. Her own, somewhere crosswise to all of it. She'd carry a mom's stubborn heat that makes bad decisions survivable. She might also carry a flashlight too dim, a phone that had become a brick, and shoes that weren't built to argue with rivers. Shadow stopped at a corner and lifted his head, his chest inflated, his paws stilled. Daniel could feel the scent line pass through the dog like a thread through fabric. The shepherd turned south, not toward the creek, but along a row of duplexes with porches like open mouths. On the third, a swing still moved with a human rhythm, not wind, forward, back, hesitate on the return, a heavy pendulum. Daniel cut the beam and hit a smear of fresh mud that ran up the steps like a question mark. He climbed. "Hello," he called. "Emergency response." A voice answered from inside, strong but breathless. "In here." He pushed into a living room that had turned into a staging area. A woman in her 30s stood in the middle, hair braided and slapped to one side, jeans dark with water. She held a plastic tote with supplies that look like panic when they're floating, diapers, a bag of rice, a photo album wrapped in a grocery sack. Around her, 3 neighbors hustled like a pit crew, one tying raincoats onto a toddler who looked ready to mutiny, another stuffing bread into a backpack, a third trying to reason with a cat who had hearings about the plan. The woman's eyes jumped from Shadow to Daniel to the street and back, then found a word and stuck to it. "Emily?" "She's safe," Daniel said, and the room's air pressure changed. The woman's hands lost half their tremor. A neighbor burst into tears and then weaponized them into speed. "Where?" the mother asked. "Home. With Ms. Anders. We stabilized Anders' oxygen. Your door is marked with light and ribbon. If we move now, we can make it in 8 minutes, 10 if we get stubborn water." Delivering time frames during a flood is like predicting the heartbeats of a drum solo. You aim for rhythm, not precision. "You coming alone or is this a caravan?" The mother looked at the others, a shrug that meant we were all going and an apology that meant we can't all go. She exhaled a decision. "They're headed to Birch, high ground. Luis has a 4x with a snorkel kit. He can ferry the rest in 2 runs. I go to Emily now." She set the tote down with the finality of a prayer and grabbed a small crossbody bag instead. "I'm Mira." "Daniel," he said. "Shadow." "Hi, Shadow," she said to the dog, because some people are born knowing to greet the helper by name. They moved. The rain tried to widen the world into something less navigable. Daniel narrowed it back to a route, porch to porch, hedge to hedge, the human scale handholds that make a flood less like an ocean and more like a bad memory with edges. Shadow took point, Mira took second, Daniel swept rear, beam low to find potholes and flash snakes and the strange glide of loose doormats that turn into skates. Twice they stopped for other doors. At one, a boy of 12 hauled a suitcase over a threshold like he'd trained for it, and Mira barked laughter at him because brave people sometimes call out competence to keep it alive. At another, a man sat on his own steps with a bleeding scalp and a stubborn expression. Daniel butterfly taped him in 30 seconds and wrote "C Clinic" on the man's palm with a Sharpie that had survived 4 deployments in this storm. "You a doctor?" the man asked, reflexively suspicious of kindness. "I'm a medic," Daniel said. "Tonight I'm a doorbell." It earned him a huff that tasted like gratitude. At Alder and 3rd, the storm brought back its favorite trap, water that looked waist-high and wasn't until you stepped into the middle and learned it had a rip current's appetite. Shadow balked, then sat, then looked left hard enough to strain his own leash. Mira followed the look. "Back lots," she said, pointing to a line of detached garages with roofs that made a continuous spine. "They connect like an alley. We can get 2 blocks before we have to fight the street again." "Lead," Daniel said, ceding field to local experience, and admired the way a mother's sense of home geography turns every structure into a possibility. They cut along the backs, plastic trash bins bobbing like bright turtles around their knees, raccoon eyes watching like skeptical parishioners. The wind dropped for 20 seconds, long enough for a sound to climb out of the noise, a long, descending metallic complaint. Daniel knew it in his bones. Somewhere upstream, something big let go. He didn't think bridge, he thought the old culvert gate at Maple that had been a problem since the county ran out of budget 5 years ago. If it failed, water would reroute through the low pocket near 118B as if it had been waiting for permission. "Move," he said, not loud, not dramatic, just enough. They ran. Shadow didn't look back to see if they were keeping up, he never had. He ran with his ears back like a missile, centered, serious. The last turn dropped them into the sight line of the blue door. The chem light glowed. The ribbon snapped its wet applause. And the street in front of the house moved in a way it hadn't before, a cross-current knuckling through, testing the steps with fingers that bent but did not yet break. Emily stood in the doorway haloed by the weird green light, Sparky's leash looped around her wrist, her chin up like she was scanning the horizon of a ship deck. When she saw Mira, the control peeled off her face hard and fast and griefy. She made a sound a little like a laugh popping in a jar and a lot like relief cracking into a sob. Mira hit the steps at a skidding run and the two collided in a human tangle you don't photograph because it is holy. Sparky jumped, then sat, then quivered in place, a tremor of pure permission. Shadow stopped at the bottom of the steps and turned outward to the street again, watching the water's new language with professional disdain. Inside, Miss Anders called weakly, "Is that you, sweetheart?" and Emily answered yes, at a volume that made neighbors 3 houses away feel less alone. Daniel felt, for 10 seconds, the absurd urge to sit down and let rain convince him it was only weather. Then the culvert gate upstream sighed its death rattle for real, and the new surge rolled at them like an incoming train. "Up," he said, and Mira, the woman who'd just got her heart back, nodded like a player who hears the next chord. "Attic?" he asked. "Pull down in the hall," she said. "Rungs are old." "Shadow," Daniel said, "rope." The shepherd shot inside, muscle turned in tension. Daniel yanked his rescue line from his pack while Mira grabbed a crank flashlight and a plastic bin lid that would become a shield if it needed to. They moved like a team built years ago and only just meeting. The house received them like a story that remembered its own next line. The attic hatch groaned like an old throat when Mira yanked the cord. A ladder unfolded, crooked and stubborn. Daniel tested the first rung with his weight, solid enough if you treated it with respect. He clipped his rescue line to the ceiling joist and gave it a tug. Shadow paced once beneath the ladder, judging it, then planted himself at its base like a sentry. "Emily first," Mira said. Her voice had that mother iron, command dressed as suggestion. Emily climbed, Sparky tucked under her arm like a sack of gold, tail flagging the air. The ladder wobbled but held. Mira followed, muscles fueled by the kind of fear that can lift cars. She disappeared into the dark, pulling her daughter into the bowl of her arms. Daniel waited until the second surge hit the foundation. The house groaned. The waterline shot up the hall like a ruler drawn in chalk. Shadow leapt 3 steps at once, claws scraping wood, and Daniel hauled him by the harness into the attic. He pulled himself up last, closing the hatch to slow the water's rise. The dark space smelled of cedar and dust, Christmas ornaments in sagging boxes, insulation like yellow frost. Lightning ripped across the roof, outlining their world in negative. Rain hammered shingles. Somewhere below, a window burst with the sound of a pistol shot. Mira crouched with Emily wrapped in the emergency blanket, Sparky curled on their feet. Shadow scanned the attic like a map, then lay at the hatch, muzzle pressed to the seam, listening. "We'll ride it," Daniel said. "House has a good frame. Flood'll settle." But the creek had other plans. By midnight, water lapped at the attic hatch. The floorboards below gurgled like a drowning throat. Daniel kicked free a vent panel, rain exploding inward, then shoved until shingles peeled like scabs. Shadow scrambled up first, nails finding grip, his silhouette a stone-cut statue. Daniel boosted Emily, then Sparky, then Mira. He climbed last, shoulders bruising through the gap, until they crouched on the roofline like exiles on a raft. The town looked unreal, a black lake with chimneys poking up like grave markers. Streetlights flickered underwater. A sedan floated sideways, horn blaring a broken hymn. In the distance, red strobes from rescue boats crawled between rooftops. Mira held Emily tight, but Emily lifted her flashlight and pointed toward the far block. "That's ours," she whispered. "That roof. That light." Daniel followed. Across the flood, another house stood stubborn, a porch light burning on generator power. A figure waved a lantern from the gable. Not random. Intentional. Someone was alive, calling. "Signal," Daniel said. He pulled his own beam and cut 3 long flashes across the water. The lantern answered, 2 slow, 1 fast. Morse for come. The creek had given them one chance, a current carrying east, toward that roof. But the way between was chaos, branches, furniture, and the unpredictable hunger of water. "Boat'll be too late," Mira said, reading his silence. Daniel nodded. "We build a raft." Shadow barked once, sharp. Agreement. They stripped the attic for what floated: closet doors, insulation boards wrapped in tarps, a plastic toy chest Emily swore could hold Sparky. Daniel lashed it all with his rescue line, arms aching, breath steaming in the cold. The raft looked like a bad dream, but it bobbed, and in flood math, buoyancy beats beauty. Emily climbed in first, clutching Sparky. Mira followed, one hand on her daughter, the other on the lash knots. Daniel steadied them, then motioned Shadow. The shepherd stepped onto the boards with the certainty of a veteran boarding a chopper. He sat square, balanced, a ballast made of will. Daniel shoved off with a broken rake handle. The current grabbed them instantly, spinning the raft like a coin. Mira gasped, Emily squealed, Sparky barked, Daniel dug the pole against invisible teeth beneath the surface. They spun, surged, corrected, progress measured in feet. Halfway across, debris slammed them, a dresser, belly up like a drowned beast. The raft shuddered. Lashings creaked. Shadow lunged sideways, teeth snapping rope back into place before it unraveled. Daniel shoved hard, teeth gritted, and they slid past with inches to spare. The lantern on the far roof blinked again, 2, pause, 2. Keep coming. Dawn came like a bruise fading, purple to gray, gray to gold. They huddled on the far roof with the lantern waver, an older man with a weather radio and a thermos of weak coffee. Rescue boats finally nosed through the current, pulling people off shingles, hauling them over gunnels slick with rain. Emily sat wrapped in Myra's arms, Sparky across her lap. Shadow leaned against Daniel's leg, eyes half closed but never fully, ears still wired to the world. The blue door of 118B stood across the water, its chem light now a faint ghost. It had kept its promise. As they boarded the boat, Mira squeezed Daniel's arm. "You don't even live here. Why risk it?" Daniel looked at Shadow, then Emily, then the battered town. "Because doors don't open themselves. Someone has to hold them." Emily touched Shadow's head. "He didn't leave the door. Not once." The soldier smiled at the dog, rain finally easing into sunlight. "That's why we made it home."